To Buses National Hustings. It is so great to see so many people in the room tonight. I think this really shows just how many people care about improving bus services across Scotland, because buses, of course, are the most popular form of public transport. More people rely on buses than any other form of public transport. So my name's Ellie Harrison. I'm the chair of the Get Glasgow Moving Public Transport campaign. And we were founded 10 years ago to campaign for a fully integrated public transport network. That means our buses, our trains and our subway being planned and coordinated as part of one network with one simple, affordable ticket that you can use across all modes. And of course, one of the key reasons why we don't have that in Glasgow and other parts of Scotland at the moment is because of the policy of bus deregulation, which was implemented in 1986, nearly 40 years ago now, which we're still suffering under now. So Get Glasgow Moving is an open membership organisation. We're all volunteers. If you want to support our work and get involved, grab one of these leaflets. We'd love you to join us. And we are also one of the organisations that set up the Better Buses for Strathclyde Coalition in 2023, along with the Scottish Trade Union Council, the Poverty Alliance, Friends of the Earth Scotland, and there are now more than 60 organisations across the region supporting that campaign. And our aim was to put pressure on our Regional Transport Authority, SPT, to commit to using the new bus franchising powers in the Transport Act 2019, which would enable them to bring the region's bus network back into public control. So we were very pleased that SPT in September last year did commit to taking forward bus franchising. So we are very keen to hear from all of our candidates tonight about what they can do to support SPT and other transport authorities across Scotland to use those powers and also to speed up the process. So before I hand over to our wonderful chair for this evening, Shona Craven, I'm just going to do a little bit of housekeeping. So first of all, we are live streaming tonight's event on the Get Glasgow Moving YouTube channel. So welcome to anybody watching online. Hopefully you can hear me loud and clear. We do hope to take at least one question at the end from the live stream. So you're welcome to type in questions, and Abby at the back is monitoring the chat. And we'll give a question from one of you at the end. Of course, this recording will also be archived online so that we have a record of the candidates' responses and pledges so that we can hold them to account after the election. And we also have two photographers here tonight. We have Sadia over there at the front, and also Neil, who will be coming later. I mean, they'll mainly be taking photographs of the panellists. If you're not happy appearing in a photo, please come and tell me or speak to Sadia or Neil directly, and they can make sure that they exclude you. We are actually keen to get photos with the placards that we have at the front here, so we'll do that in the end. If you'd like to have a campaign photo with one of our campaign placards, then we'll leave time to that. We've got this room booked till 9. So I just need to go over the fire evacuation procedure for this room. I'm glad you all managed to find your way here. There are no fire alarms planned for this evening. So if the alarm goes off, we do need to evacuate the room. And there are 3 fire exits, which are very clearly labelled, the 2 doors at the back, and this one here, which is for disabled access, which will take you round the back and then out the front of the George Moore building, where you hopefully all came in. We have, I think, 5 or maybe even 6 volunteer stewards tonight. They're members of the Get Glasgow Moving Committee. They're all wearing Better Buses for Strathclyde. If you could give a little wave, they've got Better Buses for Strathclyde t-shirts on, and if they will help to escort you out if we do need to evacuate. Toilets, if you haven't found them, are just around the corner, out the back here. And finally, before I hand over to Shona, I just wanted to sort of set the tone for tonight's debate. We are really grateful to all 6 candidates who are here tonight. We're grateful for them for giving up their time to come along this evening to discuss ways that we can improve bus services across Scotland. So we really hope that we can conduct tonight's discussion with mutual respect. Even if you don't agree with somebody's response or opinion to a question that's been asked, please listen, you can reflect, and we hope the whole point of a hustings is to help inform your decision about who to vote for on the 7th of May. So I'm now going to hand over to our chair for this evening, the writer and commentator, Shona Craven, who is sat in the middle of the table, who is also the community editor and columnist at The National. So Shona has followed the Get Glasgow Moving campaign since the very beginning, back in 2016. And she actually wrote one of the first bits of press coverage that we got for our first manifesto, and also the first petition that we took to the Parliament in December 2016. And before that, she studied public policy at the University of Glasgow, so she's kind of the ideal person to be discussing public transport with and the policies that are required to improve it. So without further ado, please welcome our chair, Shona Craven, and thank you for being here.
Hopefully I'm mic'd up and you can all hear me. So thank you again to the panel for joining us. We're in alphabetical order. So we have Michael Gibbons from the SNP. He's the candidate for West Scotland Region, or a candidate for West Scotland Region, I should say. And then we have Ross Hutton from the Scottish Conservatives, who is a candidate for Glasgow Southside. Ben Langmead, who is a Scottish Liberal Democrat candidate for Clydebank and Milngavie. Then Mark Ruskell, who is the Scottish Green Party candidate for Mid-Scotland and Fife region, and he's the transport spokesman for the party. And then we have Graham Simpson, who's the Reform UK candidate for Airdrie, and Paul Sweeney, who is the Scottish Labour candidate for Glasgow Easterhouse and Springburn. I should acknowledge that I am clearly outnumbered at this table. It is unfortunate that none of the parties have sent a female candidate to join us tonight, especially because, as many of you probably know, it's women who use the buses the most. So this is very much a feminist issue. So it is a bit disappointing, but we are obviously very glad to have all the candidates that we do have. We're not going to do prolonged introductions because we want to make sure we keep things moving and we have time for lots of questions. So I'm just going to ask one quick opening question to everyone. I'll start with you, Paul, if that's okay, and you can just pass down. And the question is just you to say hello and let us know, when did you last use the bus?
Hi everybody. It feels like I came full circle at this event because I was at the very first Get Glasgow Moving Hustings back in 2017. So I think the progress the campaign's made has been fantastic. Last time I used the bus, last week, to get to a canvassing session.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. I also last used the bus last week in Edinburgh. That's where I tend to use the bus. I live in East Kilbride. I live on an estate in East Kilbride, which doesn't have a very good bus service, to be honest. So if I get anywhere from EK, it tends to be by train. In Edinburgh, I do use the bus because it's an excellent bus service. I've also started using the excellent hire bikes that they've got in Edinburgh and indeed Glasgow, the Voi bikes. If you haven't used them, they're great fun.
Thank you.
Well, it's great to be here and really enjoyed working with Better Buses campaign over the last few years, and it's amazing how to see it grow now across Scotland, including in Fife, where I'm standing for election. I actually live in Loch Ernhead, which is a very beautiful place, but we only have a few buses every day. A couple of them are community-run buses, run by the council, and the other service is an Ember coach service. And I do occasionally get the Ember coach service. I got it 2 weeks ago to go from outside of my house straight to George Street in Edinburgh, where I can then be an MSP and do other things in Parliament.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Ben Langmead. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you for coming out. I last got the bus last year sometime, I believe, to go and watch Partick with my son. He gets the bus everywhere. But where I now work for East Dunbartonshire Council, or as a councillor in East Dunbartonshire Council, I can't get a bus from Bearsden to East Dunbartonshire very easily. There's no link across that community, so it's not the most convenient thing for me.
Thank you.
My name's Ross Hutton. Thank you to all the other candidates tonight. Thank you for Better Buses for hosting this event. And thank you all to coming out tonight. It's fantastic. It's great to see you. I don't drive, so I'm very much invested in having better bus services. As my fiancée would tell you, the only thing I'm good at driving is her up the wall. So I last got a bus on Monday to get about the wonderful Southside of Glasgow.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. My name is Michael. I'm here representing the SNP. The last time I used a bus was last weekend, also to go around Glasgow Southside, as I think we're coming home from a date then. We use it all the time, thankfully, due to the free disabled bus passes provided by the SNP, Scottish National Government. Thank you.
Okay, so to kind of set the scene for the initial questions, we're going to play the Better Buses short animation, and then we'll get each of the candidates to answer questions on behalf of the campaign. So we'll just show that now.
2 minutes, 20 seconds.
When is this bus? We'll be lucky if it turns up at all.
Why is it always like this in Glasgow?
I know, it feels like we're always being left behind.
I was just in Manchester visiting my brother, and I couldn't believe how good the buses are. They have this new e-network where you can take as many buses as you like within an hour for just £2. And it's so easy to hop on the tram or a train or even hire a bike now too, all with the same ticket. And here we are, not knowing if a bus will even show up.
Yeah, I heard it's improved down there because they've taken the buses back into public control rather than private bus companies being in charge. Now everybody can see how good it is in Manchester. Loads of places in England and the whole of Wales are doing it too.
I saw something about us getting publicly controlled buses in Strathclyde years ago. What happened to that?
The Scottish Government's created laws that make it really complicated. Our local transport authority, SPT, has an uphill battle ahead of them. They face loads of obstacles that just don't exist in England and Wales. And the Scottish Government has hardly given them any funding to help. And once they get to the end, SPT don't even have the power to decide for themselves whether to go ahead. The Scottish Government's going to make them face a so-called independent panel of experts who could just stop it happening altogether.
That's ridiculous. What can we do to speed things up? I am so fed up of waiting.
We need to get the Scottish Government to make the laws simpler and to support SPT and other local transport authorities to help make it happen. There's an election coming up, so now is our chance to tell them what we know.
Yeah, we need a public transport system that actually works for the people who live here. One that's affordable, reliable, and takes you where you need to go. We just can't wait any longer for better buses.
I think that's great. So I'm just going to give a little bit of additional context. So there was a mention in the film of the so-called independent panel. And what the film aims to illustrate is that even though SPT have now committed to use the franchising powers that exist, they have to follow the process that's set out by the Scottish Government in the Scottish Transport Act. And this is the most complex and time-consuming bus franchising legislation in the UK, which includes an additional step, in addition to all those other steps that you saw, that is not in the equivalent English legislation. And that is that the final decision is made by this independent panel, which is appointed by the Traffic Commissioner, who is an unelected official appointed by the UK government. And the panel process will add an extra 6 to 12 months onto what is already a long and time-consuming process, and it could add more than £250,000 to that process as well. And that's in addition to the risk that the panel could reject SPT's proposals altogether, and all their work up to that point, estimated to cost about £6.5 million, could then just end up in the bin. So even if that panel does approve the bus franchising plan, SPT's own timeline shows that this could take until 2031 until we see any franchise buses on the streets of Strathclyde. So, off the back of that situation, Better Buses have 2 questions about what the parties represented here will do to help speed things up. I'm just going to say that I will try and remember to time the answers. I'm going to say 2 minutes maximum, but it's very much a maximum, just so that we don't digress too much. I have a little bell. I'm sure I won't need to use it because everyone will be very well behaved. And these questions in particular are quite specific, so I think they should be quite easy to answer succinctly. So the first question is, will your party commit to simplifying the bus franchising legislation, removing the independent panel within the first 100 days of the new Parliament? And this could involve introducing a short amendment bill to simplify the powers, to bring them into line with England's tried and tested Bus Services Act, which doesn't include the independent panel. So I'm going to come to Michael first. That's okay, and then we'll just work down this way.
Thanks very much. That was an excellently directed animation. I really enjoyed watching that. I did have a good read and study, particularly of this organisation's petition that they submitted to the Scottish Parliament's petitions body. And I was a bit taken aback as to why it had stalled. I understand that there's a various number of reasons why Parliament came to the decision to have that particular check of an extra panel. I wasn't aware of the length of time that it's going to add to the process or to the cost, so I would be urging my party to look at that and to go further and faster. In terms of the complexity of the legislation, the Transport Scotland Act 2019 does have to take into account the fact that we have a very diverse set of needs in this country, different from Glasgow to Edinburgh to Aberdeen to Lerwick to Adiseg and the Islands. We have to have legislation that accounts for everyone. I appreciate that makes it more complicated and can slow things down. I would be encouraging the next Parliament to, again, reviewing that, but I can't necessarily promise you what's not going to happen or what's not in my manifesto. I would like us to go further and faster, but if that's not there, I'm not going to take you for fools. I'll be pushing them to do it, but that's where we're at.
Thank you.
I reiterate what Michael said. It was a very impressive animation. I did enjoy watching that there. So I'm going to do 2 things for you now. I'm going to outline, as a Scottish Conservative candidate, what my party's position on franchising is, and then I'm going to tell you where I stand as well. So I think I owe you that. So the Scottish Conservative Party position is anti-franchising. That's where the party is. That's where they stand. And again, it's incumbent on me sitting here as the candidate for the Scottish Conservatives to tell you that. My views are slightly different. Franchising is clearly something that I think the people of Glasgow want. I think the poll that the SPT had last year showed that. What was it, 84% support from the respondents for franchising, only 6% against nominal. This is something that's going to happen. So for me, sitting here as a candidate in this election, I want to work to make sure that this is going to work in the best way possible. So we're talking here about cutting government regulation. It's going to come to absolutely no surprise to anyone. That's something I'm very interested in doing. If we're going to go for franchising, I want it to be done in a measured way. I want it to be done in a competent way, but I don't want to drag it out. That doesn't do any good for anyone at any time. People need better buses now. You've said it yourself. Not in 2031, not in 2034, not in 2036. or whenever the next election is, people need it now. So if I can work in order to make sure that that's done in a managed way that brings the best out of the public sector and the private companies as well, then that's something that I would definitely be interested in working to do.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, I don't know about the first 100 days, but certainly it boggles the mind that Scotland always seems to try and complicate things, notwithstanding that it is diverse communities and you have to take into account a lot of different geographical areas. We've seen that franchising works in London, Birmingham, Manchester, Edinburgh. It works everywhere, and I don't know why it should take so long. I don't know why we should have this extra obsession with centralisation that means that you have to have another office, or you have to have another layer of scrutiny, another layer of checks and balances that extends the process. But yes, I would. I'd love to see franchising in Glasgow.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think what you're going to get here tonight is everybody saying, oh, we love franchising and we love the public having more control over bus services. I think the key question here is, who is actually going to commit to this in their manifesto? So I will tell you now that there is a commitment in the Scottish Greens manifesto to simplify this process, and it's there in black and white, and I hope that's something that you can welcome. But I think the key question around the first 100 days after the Scottish Parliament elections is important, because the Parliament will be a very different Parliament. There will be parties of different numbers that will have to work together on areas of consensus. So I think this should be a key demand for those parties in that first 100 days to simplify this process. We have waited too long for this. There are regions in England, metropolitan areas in England, that already have bus franchising. They have public services, public bus services that are being run now in the public interest. They are benefiting from that. So we can't see another 6-month or 12-month delay. We need to see progress being made right now on simplifying this service. And franchising won't be right for everywhere in Scotland, but it is absolutely right for Greater Glasgow and Strathclyde. There'll be other forms of community ownership, public control that are possible in other areas. Franchising may be part of that picture, but we've got a clear need here in Glasgow, Greater Glasgow, to see that brought in place, and it needs to be a priority. It's something that the Greens have committed to funding in this year's Scottish Government budget. We gave an initial £5 million to SPT to do the feasibility work on it. There needs to then be the commitment to actually deliver it, but simplifying the process needs to be a priority. It is a priority for the Greens. I'm not sure if it's a priority for anybody else.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think this was an oversight by the Parliament. It somehow got into the Act, and it shouldn't have got into the Act when it did. So it does overcomplicate things, and there's been various attempts actually in the Parliament to get the SNP to accept that the legislation is overly complicated. There's been a number of sessions where the Minister, Jim Fairley, has been grilled in committee, and we've been unable to persuade him to do anything about this. So we enter into a new Parliament. If the question is, can we do something in the first 100 days? Well, I don't think anyone can really commit to that, but what we can commit to is trying our best to get this sorted, because we cannot wait, those of us who live in this region, till 2030, 2031 for franchising to come in. Mark's absolutely right. Franchising won't be right for every area. Not every area will want it, but there's clearly an appetite here to have it. The powers exist, but the legislation needs to be simplified.
Thank you.
I think it's important to note that the 2019 Transport Act was not something that was done in the last Parliament. It was done in the Parliament before. We went through a whole political cycle, parliamentary cycle, and nothing has progressed to the extent that it should have done. And I think that's a shameful indictment on the lack of progress by the current government. They had to be dragged, kicking and screaming, to accept franchising on the face of the bill in 2019, as well as public ownership. We've had a simultaneous implementation of the legislation in the rest of the UK and England, and we've seen strides ahead, with progress in other big cities in the UK with bus franchising, yet Glasgow's still way behind the curve. to our great detriment. I think the Centre for Cities has calculated that if Glasgow had a public transport system that was on par with the rest of Europe's competitor cities, the similar cities to Glasgow and the rest of Europe, the Scottish GDP would be something like 4.5% higher. This is the opportunity we're missing here with the continued delays and bureaucratic stymieing of this progress. And just the latest example of this, one of the last questions I asked in Parliament before dissolution, was the fact that the government has only allocated a paltry £4 million to progress franchising in Scotland as a whole. The SPT alone has indicated they would need between 6 and 6.5 million to just do the Strathclyde franchise. So it's not serious, it's not realistic, and it doesn't seem urgent enough. And Labour is certainly committed to simplifying the regulations in the 2019 Act and progressing at pace with franchising in Strathclyde. We see it as a massive opportunity for the city, and it's something we should be getting done very quickly. It's such a quick win, it's such an obvious, non-confrontational, uncontroversial issue. As we've heard from the panel, it's just baffling that the government hasn't seized the initiative on it. I don't know what's holding them back. They seem to be very risk averse when it comes to bus franchising, when the political will there, and even privately, the private bus companies will admit that they are accepting the need for franchising and they will get on board with it.
Thank you very much. Paul has slightly gone into our second question, which is fine because you can elaborate further when I ask it. So the second question is, will your party commit to funding SPT and other regional transport authorities to implement bus franchising? Paul has already mentioned the cost, which was mentioned earlier, of that 6 to 6.5 million, and that's for SPT alone. And to put it in further context, English city regions have received between 1 billion and 2.5 billion each to deliver and/or enhance bus franchising and other transport infrastructure over the next 5 years. So it's a lot of money, but it is over 5 years. Scottish city regions must get similar levels of investment. That is the Better Buses position. So I'll let you just resume what you're saying. We'll go back the other way, Paul.
It depends on the detail of franchising, how much it ends up costing. We could have a situation where certain bits of infrastructure come into public ownership, such as the depots. That's one of the issues in Manchester. It's been discussed. One of the things that actually the bus companies have talked about being nervous about was huge displacement. So if they've already got, First has all their buses in their depots in a certain part of the region, if they only win the franchise for the opposite part of the region, will they have massive upheaval in trying to transfer people, buses and facilities to other operators? I think there's ways to work through that and create a stable transition to franchised model, where ultimately it will be one, you have a competition about whether it should be the Strathclyde Red branding or the old gold and green branding or whatever, or we have a completely new branding. But basically the idea is to have a single interface for the passenger with the system. Underlying that, control of the fare box is the key thing. The SPT would actually control the fare box and thus able to operate your ticketing system and timetable, etc. If they then contract out to other operators, it's a secondary concern. I think the main issue is, even if it costs £1 billion over 5 years, we're talking about a 7 billion economic prize and extra economic growth, and actually a hugely socially just opportunity for Glasgow, a city which only has a minority of people who own a car. So it's a huge issue for economic justice, social justice, as well as it being just a good utility to have. This is a city that once was a celebrated beacon for municipal socialism, and we've seen it dramatically unravel over the last 40 years. It's time to put it back together again.
Thank you very much.
Well, I'm not going to advocate for municipal socialism, whatever that may be, but I do want to see a better transport system. And I think that here in the Strathclyde region, franchising does offer that opportunity to get a joined-up system where you can have seamless transport between the different modes. So it's not just about buses, but we are talking about buses tonight. The question was, will you commit to funding? Now, I've done a lot of hustings during this campaign. Everybody asks, will you commit to funding for various things? I don't think any of us are in a position, being honest, to commit to that kind of level of funding. But what we can say, and I hope we can all say, is that we'd like to see it. We've got the legislation. SPT want to go ahead. They are going to need help. And I think probably as the first organisation to go for it, that whoever is the Scottish Government ought to be helping SPT to crack on with this.
Thank you.
I spend a lot of time with transport spokespeople from all of the parties represented here, and unfortunately when I speak to the transport national spokespeople, their priorities are not about public control of buses. Their priorities are to spend thousands of millions of pounds dualling every single last inch of the A96 and the A9 and the A77 and every other single road in Scotland. So, you know, transport does come down to choices, but you know, in terms of municipal ownership, in terms of public ownership of our bus companies, you know, there are alternative ways that we can also raise the capital and raise the revenue in order to fund that transition. And, you know, Bill talks about municipal socialism. I think actually a wonderful way to raise that money in Glasgow and elsewhere would be for there to be bus bonds so that people can invest, individuals can invest, organizations can invest in that public ownership. So public funding is important, and we need fair taxation, we need wealth taxation. In order to do that, we need to reform council tax as well so that councils have got more funds that they can spend locally. So we need to be creative with tax. We've got forms of municipal socialism in the way of bus bonds. And then we also need to see a reprioritization of capital spend. And I think if you bring those three things together, then incrementally we can see more public ownership of buses in Scotland. It has to start with SPT. Shauna's right, the English regions have had an enormous amount of investment in capital to enable that to happen in Manchester and elsewhere. We need to see similar levels in Glasgow, but there are different ways to fund it. I'm committed to ensure that we actually get there and we take the steps that we need.
Thank you.
Thank you. I get really queasy about public funding of services. We've had municipal socialism, we've had bus bonds. I used to work in New York on a finance desk, and those things never end well. I've seen it go horribly wrong. To try and combine socialism and capital markets wouldn't work. I believe our manifesto advocates for a TFL style model, where you have a partnership. The government or the partnership would collect the tickets, the ticket money, and funnel that back through the companies.
Thank you.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not going to sit here and commit myself to any great level of public funding, but I think when we speak about franchising, the level of any kind of funding with that actually depends on what model of franchising we want to go down, because I know I'm certainly guilty of it. When I talk about franchising, you can use it as a catch-all term. A lot of countries do it very differently that have already implemented this. So Singapore, for instance, it's a very centrally orientated method of franchising. The central authority, I think it's the LTA it's called, owns the buses, the depots, the branding, all that kind of thing. Private companies bid for the routes, effectively. The Netherlands do it slightly differently. So the state doesn't own the buses and the assets like that. That's the private companies that will bring that to the table. But part of the tendering process is based around, well, what are those buses going to be? Are they going to be greener buses? Okay, that's a tick in your box. Can you do more interesting things with digital ticketing? Okay, that's a tick in your box. We've spoken about the basically one app, one tap type of method here across the board. So it depends on what kind of franchising route that we want to go down, what would actually be required there. So I wouldn't want to commit myself to anything. But there are interesting examples from around the world for how you can, I think, get the best out of a franchising system that actually brings the best out of the private sector as well.
Thank you.
I agree with a lot of what my colleagues and friends have said on the panel here in terms of what we want is better buses, and owning the franchises is a method to eventually getting that. So the question was in terms of would we fund the franchising for SPT? I wish I could commit to that funding. I can't, as I'm not in a position to do so. What I can say is that in the last year of Parliament alone, we have spent 2.6 billion on public transport. We have spent a significant amount of money nationalising ScotRail. If SPT has followed the legislation, the due process, lengthy as it may be, I see absolutely no reason why that couldn't happen in a future budget of Parliament. But I'm not in a position to promise you that.
Okay. Thank you. So we'll now move on. Sorry, I'm conscious that you don't have everyone's name, so I should be reminding you who everyone is. I'll do that in the next round of questions. So everyone here was invited to submit questions to ask when you signed up. Thank you very much. We received more than 50 questions, which is amazing. These were sort of sorted into themes, and some of them kind of combined together, some of them overlapped. So the first theme is on the question of this slow progress and also on donations to political parties. So progress towards bus franchising has been painfully slow, and we're potentially got another 5 years to wait to see any positive change. But given that the policy of bus deregulation is now nearly 40 years old, and that the Scottish Parliament has had power over the network since it was established in 1999, we have to ask, what has been happening for the last 27 years? And we've heard a lot of warm words, but why have we not had more action? Is it possible, therefore, that successive politicians may have put the interests of the private bus companies, who have made so much money from bus deregulation, above the interests of passengers? And what can be done to stop this going forward? So I'm going to start with you, Mark Ruskell of the Scottish Greens, just to remind you who's who.
Yeah, thanks very much. I think it is frustrating that we've not seen greater progress. I mean, my party, with 7 MSPs in the last session of Scottish Parliament, has been prioritising buses. I don't think anyone could say that we haven't been. You know, we delivered the free bus travel for under 22s. I was involved personally in the negotiations around that 5 years ago. And we've also pushed through, you know, the bus fare cap as well. But I recognise that there are bigger problems here, and that free bus travel and cap bus fares only works if you've actually got a bus to get on in the first place. And what I see in my region is increasing number of services that are being withdrawn by companies that can't make a serious profit on the rural routes. So we need to turn the corner here. I mean, I think, as I said previously, the Scottish Parliament works well where there is consensus. So, certainly with 7 MSPs, we've tried to do our best, but I think with more Green MSPs in the room, working with other progressive parties, I think we could achieve a lot more. It will come down to those early days of the next Scottish Parliament. What can be agreed with the new incoming Scottish government? Can we get a real impetus behind public control in its various forms of our transport? And can we put some markers down working with other parties to get the next step? But yeah, ultimately my party wants to see free bus travel for everybody in Scotland, but that's only going to work if we're seeing increasing public control and a responsive bus services that are actually meeting the needs of the public. So we need to see that consensus strengthen and action rather than just words.
Thank you. And then I'll just pass on to Graham Simpson of Reform. I'll just remind you that the question was, is it possible that successive politicians have put the interests of the private bus companies above the interests of passengers?
Well, I suppose in theory it's possible, but
do you think it's happened?
I don't know if that's happened. I mean, I used to be the Scottish Conservative transport spokesman, and that was at a time when the Conservatives were in favour of franchising. I'm a bit surprised to discover tonight they're no longer in favour of franchising. I would certainly meet, and I'll continue to meet private bus companies. That's part of the job of being an MSP. It's also part of their job to meet you. They're not evil people. Some of them do run good services, and they're perfectly entitled to express a view. The question is, do you respond to that view? What you should never do, I think the basis of the question, I think what lies behind the question is, well, you can correct me if I'm wrong, if they've donated to your party, are you influenced? I think that's the inference of the question. And of course that would be entirely wrong if that was the case. I can assure you in my time that's never swayed me. In fact, I don't even want to know who's donated to any particular party. The slowness of this process frustrates me, and I think it frustrates everyone on this panel. But as far as influence goes, look, bus companies, they're entitled to lobby you. If they've lobbied you, they'll say they've lobbied you because legally they have to, but you should never be swayed by money.
Okay. Paul Sweeney of Labour, just a reminder, is it possible that interests of the bus companies have been put before passengers, and what can be done to stop this going forward?
Well, I think the private bus companies have been hostile to the idea of public control and franchising, is quite obvious if anyone's been following the issue, and the threat of litigation looms large over most of the decisions made by SPT and even the Transport Commissioner and others. There is a real nervousness in SPT that if they put a foot wrong with any of their process, that they'll get sued and dragged into the courts, and it will stall the progress of the franchise for months, if not years. So that's why, if I meet with SPT and try and cajole them a bit, I get slapped down very quickly by Valerie at SPT about, towing the line about doing this properly so we don't get embroiled in a legal challenge. And even what I say publicly, sometimes I get a rebuke from SPT saying, please don't say this, it's unhelpful. So it isn't brandished by a bus company and threatening to sue the Transport Authority for not complying with the legislation. So I think it's important to recognise that's a reality, that their hackles are up, that we've seen litigation elsewhere in the UK that's been successfully overcome by the regional transport authorities that have done franchising so far. So we've got a good baseline to work from. I think it's important that the government does have a better risk appetite for doing this. It's very much in our manifesto in black and white. Bring local bus services back under public control, full stop. So that is the goal and that is the consensus. And actually, as I say, I've met with McGill's, I've had those conversations. Privately, I think it's fair to say they want assurances about stability for their operations and how this can actually be beneficial for everyone concerned. That it will grow ridership, it will grow participation in buses, it will modal shift away from the car towards the bus. And actually, if you have a single user interface, if you have a single integrated transport system, then the whole pie will grow for all concerned. Control of the fare box is the key thing. That if the Regional Transport Authority can control the fare box and distribute accordingly, that will allow for coherent management of the system. And I think it's a logic that is very difficult to challenge, and I think we're going to get there.
Okay, thank you. Just to refer to the costs, obviously, of the legal compliance, that's part of what we were talking about in the previous question. That's why there's a lot of money required to obviously make sure that, people don't end up in trouble. Anyway, I'm narrating. So onwards with this question, just to remind you. Huh?
Pass it down. And then work this way.
Oh no, you can go now. So yes. Ben Langmead of the Scottish Conservative, Scottish Liberal Democrats, you've thrown me off. Is it possible that successive politicians may have put the interests of the private bus companies first, and what could be done to stop this going forward?
I don't know. I think it's probably not so much a question of malice or putting anyone's interests ahead of anyone else's more than it is incompetence. It's terribly complicated, and working within a coalition or a minority government is never going to be easy. So it's trying to meet all those competing things, and unfortunately, it's yourselves that suffer through that. It seems incomprehensible that a law is passed in 2019, and in 2026 it's still not enacted.
Okay, thank you. And then back to Ross Hutton, who is from the Scottish Conservatives. You know the question by now, so I'll not repeat it again.
No, thank you very much. Now, listen, you talk about influence there. I'm a first-time candidate, so this is all new to me. I'm not an MSP, and I think the first words that came out of my mouth tonight were saying that actually I'm willing to make franchising work because I appreciate that it's something that the people of Glasgow want overwhelmingly, and I actually do see the benefits of it and making it work in a sensible and logistical way. So I don't think it'd be fair to infer on me that I've been influenced in any way, shape or form by that. And the kind of broader point about it though, not just to make it about me, I appreciate I've also told you tonight that the Scottish Conservatives' position is anti-franchising, but we're not in power in Holyrood, last time I checked. Maybe we'll be in a couple of weeks' time. Maybe we'll leave here tonight skipping out the door to go and vote for us. I'd hope that would be the outcome. But we're not in power, as has been stated by a few of the other candidates on this panel. This law was passed in 2019. So I'm really not trying to give Michael a hospital pass here, but I think if you do want to ask about slow progress, ask the people who have been in power about that. And I'm really sorry, that is a bit of a hospital pass.
Okay, and a reminder, this is Michael Gibbons from the SNP.
No, that's fair enough. I'll answer the question put to me, which was basically how are we funded, and is that influencing our thinking at all? And to be quite frank, in this case, absolutely not. And in many other cases in my party, In fact, I want to say all cases, absolutely not. My party is a democratic one. Our policy is set by our members at our conference and councils. Our campaigns are run almost exclusively by small individual donations by individuals, not by groups. Do we meet and engage and listen to others? Yes, yes we do. And we do our best to try and get as much a consensus as possible. Do we get it right all the time? No, we don't, but we do try very hard. On this about why the policy is taking its time, Paul's partially alluded to it. We want to make sure that it's done right. We want to make sure that it's done effectively, and we don't want to tie anyone up in court or end up costing councils untold millions that they don't have. It's not an ideal system, and it's not a system that can be fixed overnight, but we're working as best we can to do so. What I will suggest is that one of the reasons why things may seem slow is this last session of Parliament. I don't know if anyone's been paying attention to it. It has been brutal for just about everyone involved. A lot of the consensus building has really taken a significant hit. So I really hope that whoever's in Parliament next time works constructively with all parties and remembers that this is a rainbow Parliament built on cooperation and agreement and mutual consensus.
I've got to say that's actually not true. Having been in the last Parliament, the consensus on this issue was that there was a strong consensus. The problem is the government dragged its feet.
Okay.
So that's what happened.
Thank you. Sorry. Okay, well, we'll move on to the next question is about inequality between and within Scottish regions. So after SPT, which is home to 2.2 million people, Sestran, I think that's so hard to say, Sestran is the second biggest regional transport partnership in Scotland, covering 1.6 million people in the Borders, Lothian and Fife. And there are huge inequalities in bus service provision within that region, with publicly owned Lothian buses providing what is considered to be one of the best bus services in the UK, and Borders Council, which is making significant improvements to its network, with nearly half of all of its bus services now publicly owned. So can I ask Stuart Knowles, who is a volunteer with the new Better Buses for Fife campaign, to ask this next question?
Yes, so what will your party do to address inequalities in service provision, both within and between Scotland's regions? Where we are in Fife, we're between Tactran and Sestran, which is we are in the Sestran partnership. And what will that do to help deliver better buses for Fife?
Thank you very much for that question. So I'm going to start with Ben of the Lib Dems.
Thank you very much. It seems a problem of communication to have people work together and try and improve timetables, improve link-ups between different services. Certainly in East Dunbartonshire, where I live, you can get a bus to a train station, but the train's just pulling out. As you go out to Argyll and Bute, you have buses arrive as the 3 remaining ferries that work drift away from the dock. Better communication, not necessarily, again, run by a committee, which gums things up a lot more, but better communication and better coordination of those timetables.
Thank you. And then to Ross.
Well, Stuart, thank you very much for your question. I think there's quite a lot of dissatisfaction with rural communities and the bus service that they're getting provided. You've noticed in Dumfries that Stagecoach have been reducing services down there as well. In rural communities, I think only 41% of the bus routes were deemed accessible for people, so this isn't good enough. I completely agree. The Scottish Conservatives do want to implement a rural bus fund so local councils can apply for more money to keep bus routes open and try and have that positive impact in rural communities, because no matter where you live, we are quite fortunate in a sense in Glasgow that we do have bus routes in there. We all agree, I think, that we all need better bus services, but there are communities out there that are just being absolutely decimated by this. So that's something with the rural bus fund that we want to try and proactively try and solve. And again, working with companies like that in order to try and get the best out of the private sector to try and keep those bus routes open, improve those services for local people and make them accessible to everybody.
Thank you. And then Michael.
Thanks. I'd like to learn a bit more about this particular issue, so I'm not going to talk about what I don't fully understand. What I will say is that by the end of this Parliament that we're trialling right now in the Highlands, Shetland, Moray, Argyll and Bute is a £2 cap on the fare. So the intention and desire is to increase the ridership and increase the franchise, the number of people who are using the bus services, increasing the number of people caring about the bus services. That in its turn will eventually improve the service. It's a long-term solution, so we'll be looking at other ways to do so. I'd like to catch up with you after and learn more about this, if that's okay.
Thank you. And then Mark with Scottish Greens.
Great. Yeah, really pleased there's a Better Buses for Fife, and if I'm still in a job in a few weeks' time, I'd really, look forward to working with you, because I think there are some different issues. And you mentioned about the the regional transport partnerships. The models that exist outside of Strathclyde are different. So SPT's got a critical role in terms of commissioning services, running services. That's different with CESTRANS and TACTRANS that are more about transport planning. So I think we need a slightly different approach. We could reform the transport partnerships. But what I do see with Fife Council, as Scotland's third biggest council, is the opportunity there to come in with direct municipal ownership. Now, this is happening already in the Highlands and Islands. They've started off with, I think, 8 routes, which they've been running directly by the council. They've been taking on routes which are perhaps forgotten about by the commercial bus companies. It's happening in Stirling as well, where we've got a Green councillor that's running transport planning within Stirling Council now, where we've managed to open up 4 actually rural bus routes in the last 3 months, again, that have been abandoned by commercial bus companies. So I think given the size of Fife, it should be possible to design bus services that are both profitable while using the farebox income to support those that are least profitable. And I think we've also got some amazing models of Kinrossshire as well. The Glenfarr Community Bus Group is doing amazing work. They've transformed a service that Stagecoach had just abandoned, and now there are dozens more people that are actually using that service every single hour than there was under the Stagecoach ownership. So there are different models that are possible there, but I think getting the focus onto Fife, looking at what we can do, looking at what other councils can do, working with what we've got, I think we can deliver our own type of public ownership and actually meet what communities need.
Thank you very much. And then to Graham for reform.
Yeah, Stuart, thanks for the question. I think what this highlights, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I think CESTRAN's position is that it doesn't want franchising throughout its area, and that goes back to what myself and Mark were saying earlier, that it is a choice. Not everyone will want it. Within their area, of course, we've got the excellent Lothian buses. A great model, offers a really good service, but it's not for everyone. Now, Fife, I've never represented Fife, so I don't know what bus service you've got there, but from what you're saying, you're probably in the position that there'll be areas of Fife, particularly rural areas, that are bus deserts, as I would describe them. And that actually doesn't just apply to rural areas. I said at the start, I live in East Kilbride, big town. The bit of East Kilbride that I live in is a bus desert. There's not a service that's worth having. So it doesn't just apply to rural areas. So what we need to do is, for organisations like CESTRANS, I think if they don't want to go down franchising, is to work with the operators to identify those areas where there are gaps, and there are big gaps, and then try to do something about it. Funding will, of course, come into it.
Thank you.
Thanks
and
very much.
Paul for Labour.
Thanks. We are committed to a national transport improvement plan, which will identify where there are current gaps and build that out from there. And I think our key issue is actually addressing the big unfinished job of the Scottish Parliament after 25 years, which is the shattered landscape of local government in Scotland, which was left behind by the last Conservative government in the mid-1990s when the regional councils were dismantled in a kind of act of spite after Strathclyde resisted water privatisation, and we lost our bus company as well. But I think the issue is a Local Democracy Act, which Labour is committed to, will try and address this. So this will be about allowing regions to establish combined authorities, and indeed if they wish to have a directly elected mayor. I think we've seen how successful that can be in other parts of the UK in terms of coalescing local accountability with a span of control that allows fast delivery and to be held accountable with tangible outputs. I think that's going to be a key issue. Scotland's too centralised. We have a will in Strathclyde to push ahead with bus franchising, for example, or indeed to build the Clyde Metro, but the power and financial control is held at Andrews House in Edinburgh, and they've been maintaining a very tight grip on that power for too long, and thus stymieing progress in the west of Scotland. We're actually losing an MSP and an MP in Glasgow because of the relative population decline in the west of Scotland, the relative economic decline in the west of Scotland relative to the east. So I think it's just one symptom of a wider issue, over-centralisation of political power and control in Scotland, and we need to address that. And it's not just about giving notional powers to local authorities, it's actually giving them the financial capacity and autonomy to drive ahead with it. You see that in other parts of the world where you align the span of control over finance and regulation with the political accountability, things start happening very quickly, and that's what we need to unleash in Scotland. Huge potential if we can crack that.
Thank you very much. Okay, so the next question covers two related topics, which is rural services, which has also been touched on already, and accessibility. So the first question was submitted by Michelle Marshall in Buchan, who is a volunteer with the new Better Buses for Grampian campaign. Hello, Michelle, if you're watching online. And Michelle asked, how can it be justified that the North East has a terrible bus service, expensive, unreliable, often inaccessible, and now we're being told we have yet another price increase from Stagecoach? The privatised buses do not work for ordinary people in the North East, so what will you do to fix this? And then the second question was submitted by Mary Dawson from Bargeddy. Are you in the room, Mary? Oh, yes. Can we get the microphone to Mary and she can ask? Or do you want me to ask it?
Do you want to?
I'll do it, yeah.
I've got a print of it.
Okay, cool. So the question here is, when will we have an inclusive bus service that runs frequently and serves all ages and those with disabilities in our communities and helps stop isolated communities, people from isolated communities travelling to appointments and evening visits to hospitals or social events? So let me know by the time I come to you if you need a reminder of the two questions. So we've got the question of rural services, the price versus the quality, and then access for people of all ages, including those with disabilities and people in isolated communities who have these really important journeys that they need to make. So I will start with Graham from Reform, please.
Okay, well, if we take them in order, so the Grampian question, I think it goes back to what we've been discussing about rural services and gaps in the in services and those bus deserts that I mentioned, and I think really what's needed is a review in those areas of where the gaps are. And the question, I think it was Michelle?
The first one.
Yeah. Mentioned cost. There is a trial of £2 fare cap in the Highlands. Now, I'm going to take some credit for that because I was asking for that. He always loves it when I say this. But it is true. I was banging on about having a fare cap for years, and eventually my good friend Fiona Hislop agreed to introduce it on a trial basis, and that's what happened. That's the truth. So we're gonna trial this. It will come at a cost, but I think it'll clearly make it more affordable for people in the Highlands. Now that's all well and good if you've got a bus, but many people don't have a bus. So that's what we need to address. Now we come to Mary's question, and Mary, do you mind if I ask you a question? Do you object to that? Okay. I just wonder what lies behind the question. I mean, is there other issues that you've been having or friends?
A good reason. I was born in sorry. Hopefully that's all right, you can hear me. I was born and brought up in Glasgow, and I moved out to North Lanarkshire, and there was, like new builds, and there was buses every 15 minutes, then every 20 minutes, then every half hour. Now it's 1 an hour, and the small bus that runs, it runs a couple of minutes before, and then you've got a gap during the week where it would be like a school run. How do folk get? Now, I drive, but I've got a bus pass, and I've had a bus pass for ages. But I see the isolation in the community out beside me, because I'm out at Brigadier, and it came home to me in 2019 when I realised that the number 2 decided nobody's going to Airdrie, so we won't run a bus, in their wisdom, and that was the end of it, and nobody wanted to know. And I got in touch with my MSP, and I got in touch with my MP, who said the MSP old days is telt, which wasn't an answer. The answer I got back is, like a dial-a bus. No, that's not what the answer was. And United buses were running, and there was times I took my grandchildren on that bus, and they were fined £3,000 for having a bus on the road that wasn't fit for purpose. So having at times gone on the bus, to come into Glasgow for whatever reason, I see the community as isolated, and workers like home carers going from Milngavie up to the main road to try and get a bus to get to the work early in the morning, and driving down at the underpass at night, seeing folk walking for Baillieston to get to Brigadier, wherever they're going, and they can't get a bus. Folk going to Monklands Hospital, they can't get a bus back out. They've got to rely on folk with cars. It's the 21st century, and we're isolating folk with disabilities, whether it's learning, physical, and like pensioners like myself, although I'm still quite lucky. And I think that's terrible. It's a terrible indictment for Scotland to be in such a position. Thanks.
Well, thanks very much, Mary, because I think you've just described why we need franchising, I think, in the area that we live in, and I'd hope it covers North Lanarkshire, because that's part of Strathclyde. Yes. So that's why I want to see franchising, and franchising shouldn't just be for ideological reasons. It's because you can organise things better and identify those areas where there isn't a bus service, where there isn't a regular bus service, because if there isn't a regular bus service, people will turn to the car, or they'll find other ways of getting around, or they won't, or they'll just sit in their homes and they'll be isolated. And that's why we need a proper public transport service. I'd also like to see, and we haven't mentioned it yet, the Clyde Metro plan, which is all pretty sketchy at the minute. I want to see some details on that, and I want to see, and this guy's nodding furiously because he wants to see a rail link to Glasgow Airport. I'd like to see that as well. There's huge opportunities if we get Clyde Metro up and running, but like everything in this country, it takes forever, and I'm not sure I'll even see it in my lifetime, but it's immensely frustrating. We've got an opportunity to do things better in this region, and we should all want that. It doesn't matter what party we're in. Sorry, that took rather a long time.
That's okay, because it was 2 distinct questions, so I've given you 4 minutes, and thank you, Mark, for not interrupting when you might have been minded to. You should have got a ding in the bell for speaking last time out of turn. But I'll let you go next, Mark.
I would simply note, though, that Graham, that there's no commitment to bus franchising in the Reform UK manifesto. So, what you say tonight, As ever, Graham, what you say is always like very commonsensical on some issues in relation to transport. I'm not entirely sure where your party is actually going when you get into the Scottish Parliament in a few weeks' time. I think it's a really important point, and I see my neighbours in Loch Ernhead, some of whom don't drive and are elderly and are really, really isolated. And I think the withdrawal of the bus service from Killin to Callander was really devastating because, our health services are in Larbert. So, you have to get several buses, 3 buses effectively, to go to an appointment at Forth Valley Royal. And with the centralisation of a lot of the health services and the closure of a lot of community health, primary care, you are seeing an increasing reliance on services, increasing reliance on transport. In that situation, both the council and the community have stepped in. So the community have stepped in to run their own service, their own kind of minibus service to take patients to the hospital. But also the council, as I said earlier, has stepped in to actually replace the demand responsive transport, which wasn't working, the kind of dial a bus, dial a taxi scheme, and replace it with a small bus service, a minibus service that has got accessible vehicles and can actually meet the demands of people. And I think the key thing here, and what perhaps the bigger bus companies are very poor at, is actually listening to people and actually designing services to meet their needs. So what will often happen is a company will, pull a bus route and say, well, nobody's getting on this bus, and therefore it's not profitable for us to run it anymore, so we're going to pull it. What I see publicly owned services, including council and community-owned services, doing is actually going around the doors and actually knocking on the doors and saying, what kind of service would you like in your community? What would get you onto the bus? What would meet your needs? So I think that's what we need. We need services that are designed in the public interest, that are actually meeting the public's needs, and are actually recognizing that we've got some very vulnerable people in our community. We need to design services around that. In relation to the question about the North East, I think there are similar issues. And yes, the bus fare cap has been a useful trial. It was something that was agreed between Scottish Greens and the SNP in the budget, so it's not about just ideas, it's about commitment to action. I hope that can be rolled out, but ultimately I want to see free public transport because we've got a situation at the moment where folks turn 22 and suddenly they don't get access to free public transport anymore, and they have to pay full whack rates, adult fares, which in rural areas can be extortionate. So we need to see that extended. But I would also come back to the A96 because in the Northeast, the political debate has been dominated by dualling every single last inch of the A96 and the thousands of millions of pounds that would absorb. What we need is a balanced package of measures there. We need investment in public transport, investment in rail, because there's rail routes that need to be reopened in the Northeast as well. And we need to see limited improvements in road to improve road safety and put in bypasses where they're needed and they can bring a benefit to communities. But this kind of obsession with road building is stripping out the capital investment. It's absorbing all the politics and the political energy within the Scottish Parliament. So all the transport spokespeople want to talk about is about expanding roads and about dualling roads, and it's absorbing all the budget. And we have to make choices. If we value bus services, we have to start investing in them. We have to start investing in free bus travel, but we also need to invest in the capital infrastructure, the buses, the bus stations, and we need to start running those in the public interest.
Thank you very much. I'll go to Paul from Labour now in 4 minutes, since it is 2 questions.
I think it's a really good question, and it cuts to the core of what this is about, really, for me. Social justice and inequality. And inequality often manifests itself in subtle but sharp ways, and I think our inadequate public transport system is a good example of it. So my mum works at TSB, and she used to be in the branch in Springburn where she could stroll from her flat to go to work. They closed the bank down, and they wouldn't make her redundant because she'd worked there for too long and it would be too expensive. So they kept her on and they made her go to work in Shettleston. Well, they moved her around all over the place. She's been in Coatbridge and Motherwell, Shettleston. And she soon found out it was really difficult to get there by public transport, even though she's of an age now where she's got her free bus pass. It's not much use if it doesn't actually get you where you need to be and the bus doesn't show up or it doesn't connect sufficiently to get you where you need to go. She was turning up to work late quite often and facing potentially disciplinary action. So she ended up having to get a car, and she now has to drive to work because she physically can't get to her job without a car. And that's the same for public sector workers, private sector workers, shift workers all over the city region and further afield. It's a tax essentially on accessing work, and for many people that's an insurmountable barrier to work. So I think that's a massive issue we don't understand well enough, and I don't think policymakers who are probably quite car-centric in their thinking, don't consider when we talk about inequalities in Scotland. And we're very focused, as I think certainly the Scottish Government has been for many years, on transactional things like let's give you a free bus pass, let's do that, without tackling the underlying quality of the service and actually understanding where the demand signal is. So an interesting thing that Denmark have done, which Labour has got in its manifesto, is having a national fare system. It's a bit like Uber for public transport, where you can tap in, tap out on your phone. And that would give you very, very detailed data on where people would like to use public transport, and then you can plan accordingly to meet demand. Right now it's really incoherent, and the picture of what is needed isn't fully understood. So we could really, really improve our planning of transport just by tightening up, having an integrated ticketing system, so you could actually say, well, I can't actually get on the public transport, and you could signal that through your phone, and that would help design a public transport system that's more responsive. But I think the point comes back to franchising. If you can use the fare box to use the profitable routes to subsidise the unprofitable routes, then you can deliver a public transport system that's based on the needs of the people, not just on the profit margins of private bus operators so they can pay themselves handsome dividends. It's a shameful redistribution of wealth in favour of the wealthy and against the workers. And that's ultimately, if you want to put a political angle on bus franchising, that's exactly why it's so necessary in Greater Glasgow and beyond.
Thank you very much. And then to Michael for the SNP.
Thanks very much. So we've got two questions primarily on rural services and inclusivity. I acknowledge that bus services are not what they should be in rural areas, and that's why it's important with the legislation that we have that it takes the time to get it right for those individual communities. We are going to implement a £2 cap on single fares. That means that to get from Nairn to Inverness, that previously would have cost you over £30 each way, is now just going to be £2 each way. I'm glad that we've got such support from Reform on it, even though it wasn't in their manifesto. And in terms of inclusivity in our bus services, absolutely crucial. We're one of the few parties in our manifestos to have committed to implementing a Human Rights Act in the next term of Parliament. What this Act will do is incorporate UN legislation on the rights of disabled people, so that when we plan services, when local authorities, when NHS services are having to plan any of their services, we have to pay due regard to disabled people and those most likely to use that service. That'll be a landmark bill, and I cannot wait to see it tabled. On top of that, every disabled person in receipt of adult disability payment has free access to our bus services. And as of, I want to say 2 months ago, maybe last month, that's now guaranteed to have a +1 carer. So that increases our access. There's a lot of work to still do that I want to see. And I really hope that happens in Parliament with effective scrutiny. Thank you.
Thank you. And then, Ross from the Conservatives.
No, thank you to Michelle, and thank you, Mary, as well, for your question, because I think we can all be quite guilty about talking about it in the abstract, can't we, about the need for better buses, and talking about it in such a way that doesn't actually incorporate the human element of it. So I really do appreciate your story and you saying that there. I mentioned the Netherlands earlier on. This is something that they do quite well. So taking it routes first and foremost, so the central authority in the Netherlands will plan obviously the tendering of the contracts, but they also plan the routes. So if you're a private operator bidding to have a bus service in there, you're agreeing to that route, and that is part of the contract, so you're absolutely signed up to that. But the other thing that I mentioned earlier on that they do quite well when assessing the bids from those private operators is assessing it based on more than just the price. So if you're a private operator and you come and say, listen, I've got a bus that's better for the environment, this is going to be greener, I've also got a bus that is more accessible to people in wheelchairs, that can hold more people, that's all ticks in your boxes. So I think if franchising does come in, and it is a route that I know we want to go down, then that's something that should be part of the tendering process as well, so you're having a more holistic approach to it. On the £2 bus cap fare, so Graham's happy to take the credit, I'm sure he's also happy to take the blame for a lot of this, because if you cap fares without actually fixing the problem, Paul touched upon this, then all you're doing is juicing demand without actually fixing any of the underlying causes of the issues. So what happens if the operating costs rise with a capped fare and you've absolutely juiced the demand for that? Two things go. One is frequency of buses and the other is routes. Now, I don't think anyone wants to see that. You can maybe decide for yourself which one seems worse. Neither seem like a very good option to me. And that's my concern with the £2 cap fare, whereas if you actually have regular buses that people want to use, that know will come on time, that know will get to A to B fast enough, they know that they have one tap, one app, like we said about an integrated system, that's all the things that gets people on buses. And my concern with the £2 fare cap is all it's going to do is it's going to adjust demand, and that's going to have a negative impact on the actual service quality for people because we've not fixed the underlying issues that we have with it.
Okay, thank you. And then Ben from the Lib Dems.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the question. I don't know if anyone's picked up on it, but I'm a bit of a minnow at this table, dealing with some people who have a lot of experience. Franchising, I agree in large part with what a lot of my colleagues have said. Franchising, you should be able to bundle the less profitable routes with the more profitable ones to make it attractive to bus companies so that at least they can turn a profit. When I was elected to council recently in East Dunbartonshire, one of the first problems that came up was people wanting to get their school kids from Westerton to Beauclair Academy. It's a 2.5, 3 mile journey, nothing. It's a very small ward that I represent. I could not believe how difficult it was to send emails to SPT and I think 4 different bus companies, all of whom come back and say, no, it's not viable. There was a petition there with 500 plus signatures on there and they still said it wasn't viable. We need to strip that out as part of the franchising and have the routes decided with local knowledge at community council level, at council level, so that people can say, no, we need to run a bus service here. If you're going to build a colossal new development of hundreds of houses, you need to arrange public transport there. You can only encourage people away from private transport and towards public transport, buses, trains, ferries, by making sure that they are clean, that they run properly and that they can be relied upon.
Thank you very much. So the next question is about revenue funding for better bus services. If we want to implement bus franchising and deliver a step change in bus service provision with frequent, reliable services at all times of day and night, we're going to need more investment. So we'd now like to ask Mart Aftalian of Living Rent to pose this question, as the group has been campaigning on this issue in Glasgow.
Thank you. Yep. So I'm from Living Rent. We're a tenants and communities union. We represent our members who are workers, tenants, residents, carers, people who all really need a good bus service and rely on the bus service a lot in their daily lives. And in the last year, we've been campaigning with Get Glasgow Moving to try and push Glasgow City Council to pursue alternative methods of raising funds. And for example, the council's going to be implementing a tourist tax next year, and called the visitor levy. And there's other methods like the workplace parking levy, where they're going to be raising money to spend in the city. Our point is that some of this money should be ring-fenced to go towards improving public transport. So in the case of the tourist tax, better buses or a good bus network is vital for tourism in any city. Look at any tourist capital in Europe, like Paris, Amsterdam, anywhere. They've got great bus systems, and it's important not only for the tourist experience, but also for the tourist economy and for the workers who work there. So my question is, in principle, would you support money from this sort of money raised in this sort of thing from being ring-fenced for transport and improving transport and moving to franchising?
Thank you, Mark, for the question. I'll go first to Ross from the Conservatives.
Oh, thank you very much for the question, Mark. So I think what we're referring to there is actually getting people into the city in some way, shape or form, to spend their money, to live in the city, to work in the city, to enjoy hospitality in the city. And I've got concerns about tourist tax as a method about going to do that. I think what we all want to see, whether you live in Glasgow or whether you don't, is a thriving and vibrant city centre. I live in a thriving and vibrant Southside. We all have our complaints about the state of Glasgow city centre, don't we? I don't think that's a controversial statement whatsoever. You talk to the people who work in Glasgow city centre, you talk to the people who live in that area as well. They all have issues with that. One of the things that can help regenerate the city centre is by having additional footfall into it, making it a very welcoming place to be, ensuring that people can come, go for a meal, have a drink, do their shopping and have a very pleasant experience. I also want to see greater tourism from externally from the UK into Glasgow. There's no reason, as far as I'm concerned, why Glasgow can't be the Hamburg of the UK or the Krakow of the UK, a really desirable city that people do come from all over the world to see. And I don't think we do a good enough job at times at selling ourselves like that. So I've got concerns about a tourist tax in terms of that sort of method, in terms of funding it. But I would be happy to work with any kind of bus companies in order to make sure we can procure good services for people that bring down fares in a natural way, and that helps people, wherever they are in Scotland, to come to Glasgow and enjoy a good time here.
Thank you. And if we could just pass to Michael from the SNP, and just a reminder that we're talking about ring fencing of tourist tax or visitor levy and potentially the workplace parking levy in order to invest that in public transport.
First up, for answer the question, can I just commend Living Rent for a lot of the really, really good work that you're doing? I know people who are no longer homeless and not homeless because of the amazing work that tenants units such as Living Rent across the country carry out. Now, to fully answer the question, I am 100% supportive of local authorities implementing tourist tax and having that control over how they spend it to a significant point. As someone who is going for Holyrood, I don't want to be dictating too much to councils about how they spend their money, especially money that they have the responsibility over raising. But I see absolutely no reason why that shouldn't be spent on transport links. We've talked a lot about other countries, other cities. Many of them across Europe have tourist tax that work very, very well. They don't cost a fortune. They don't discourage me from going to visit them, to experience their culture, their art. Glasgow is the finest city in the world, and I think we should be supporting money into that as best we can. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, thank you. On to Ben from the Lib Dems. Just to say, we're talking about the ring fencing of tourist tax rather than whether it's a good idea.
I get quite queasy about ring fencing funds. I think you'll find that if a new tax is being implemented, it's probably already been spent. It's interesting to hear the SNP say councils should be responsible for raising their own money and they don't want to interfere too much. If councils were properly funded from Holyrood, then we wouldn't need these extra levies, extra taxes. But no, ring fencing I get a little bit queasy about.
Okay, thank you. And then Mark from the Greens.
Yeah, look, I'm really excited about a tourism levy because I live in an area where we have a lot of tourists, but our public services need to be improved for both locals and visitors. And one of the things that the National Park did is to trial a tourist bus, which went from Callander over to Aberfoyle, and now it's been taken on by the council. But those are the kind of services that can be funded through a tourism levy. And I think we need to be, not afraid of tax. We need to be not afraid of using tax creatively. And perhaps we need a bit of a shift now away from taxing work towards taxing wealth, and for us taxing things. Oh, great. and taxing things that are bad as well. So, if there are pollution taxes that can come in, that can also be used to then invest in some of the solutions to that pollution, then good. That's the investment that we need. And, in terms of investment in transport, I always think back to that time 20 years ago, I think 22 years ago, where there was a referendum on a congestion charge in Edinburgh. And, all the parties ganged up against it. And as a result of that, Edinburgh lost an incredible income stream that would have utterly transformed their public transport in their city. We probably wouldn't have had the problems with the Edinburgh trams because the scale of the rollout of the 3 tram lines together with the added revenue, added input financially from the congestion charge would have made it a more effective project. So, I think congestion charges, workplace parking levies have to be introduced sensitively. It has to be a local decision that councillors have to make with communities. But, we shouldn't turn our nose up at the opportunity to bring in income which can be then used to give people a really decent alternative to the private car that so many people are locked into using. And that means a bit of creativity around how we tax.
Thank you very much. And then Graham from the phone.
Yeah, thank you. I'm actually not a fan of taxes, and certainly I'm not a fan of the suite of taxes that the Greens would bring in if they get, in the terrifying event that they get into power. I think Scotland could be hit with a whole raft of new charges. So I don't like them. I voted against the workplace parking levy. My understanding is Glasgow City Council is not proceeding with that for very good reasons. We are going to have a tourist tax. So if we're going to have a tourist tax, it should be used, I suppose, for improving the lot of visitors to the city. So transport is part of that. I don't like the idea of a tourist tax, but if it's there, then use it to, improve the visitor experience.
Okay, thank you. And then Paul for Labour.
Thank you. I think it's a really good point, and it comes back to the issue I raised earlier, municipal socialism. Let's think of a system that actually is a virtuous cycle rather than a vicious cycle. Most European public transit systems in big cities tend to have what's known as a fare box recovery ratio. That's a bit of a technical term, but it's how much the revenue generated from the transport system covers the cost of operating it. Most European transport systems cover more than half of their operating costs with the fare box. So Vienna, for example, 55% covered by the fare box, 45% government subsidy to balance the system. In Scotland, it's actually really bad. Like in the buses, in the case of buses, the private bus operators, we're talking 55% plus government subsidy to run the bus services in Scotland, with a minority of the revenue covering the cost of the operating the service, because it's a really bad service and it's intuitively hard to use. So unless you're desperate to use it and there's no alternative, you're going to do it. And then that compounds the fact that more cars are on the road. It's then more expensive to run a given service because you need to have more buses per route to meet the service standards. It just becomes a really vicious cycle, which makes it more expensive and less usable. So we need to break this vicious cycle through franchising, and I think that's why it's really important. I think the point made about the tourist levy, which I fully support, I think it's a great initiative for Glasgow. I think anyone who's been around Europe would know it's a really neat way of raising extra revenue. No one's going to not go to Glasgow to visit because of a tourist tax. It's just not something that behaviourally people realise is a thing until you check out your hotel. I think it's a really quick win to raise extra revenue in Glasgow. I guess to echo points made earlier, let's respect different levels of government. It would be a matter for councillors on the City Council to determine the best use of those funds, but I would certainly endorse the idea of prioritising franchising because it will unlock a greater value for the public purse as a whole, and it will achieve better outcomes for Glaswegians in terms of service standards and being able to access opportunities. Okay. So it seems like a quick one.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, we are running a little bit out of time. Can I ask Abby, do we have a question from the live stream? Or has anyone else been mulling over any? Oh gosh, oh my God. No, sorry.
Can of worms.
Okay, we have one from the live stream, apologies, I shouldn't have asked.
So someone from the live stream wasn't quite satisfied with the responses to the Fife question. They asked, why do candidates think franchising isn't for everyone? What is their criteria for deciding who it is for?
Okay, can we try and do 1 minute from end to end? Okay.
It's for local councils and communities to decide. I think we've had a pretty good consensus that it doesn't work for everyone.
Okay, on you go.
I'll agree with that, to be honest. Local people and local communities should decide and inform us about what's best for them. If we are in a position where we're coming and dictating to you, saying, no, this is what's best for your area, this is what's best for you, and this is going to happen, it becomes top down, that's not what anybody wants. So if local people want it, then that's something they can move forward with. If local communities don't want it, if that's not the best thing for them, then we don't do it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry the person who asked the question wasn't happy with the answer. To be clear, the legislation empowers local councils and local authorities to pursue that. Glasgow particularly, under the SPT region, has, I want to say, 12 under its SPT, all of whom endorse and want to go ahead. Fantastic, and we'll support them as best we can to do so. but you'll have other services who don't have that same level of income. And that way, if they are then taken into a council-run body, there is a risk of reduced services, increased prices, or service collapse, and we do not want to see that happen. So there are different mechanisms so that they can do that, and that's down to the complexity of the legislation. And I hope that provides a greater degree of clarity.
Thank you. And Mark?
Yeah, I think it's about reflecting those different circumstances at a local level. So yes to public ownership, but public ownership and public control can be done in different ways. And I pointed already to how Stirling and Highland councils are running direct municipally run services. That may be a better way forward. It may be a better way forward for those services to also work with community run services. But the option of franchising, where effectively multiple bus operators can then choose to bid in to run publicly controlled services, is something that I think all councils and regional transport partnerships should be considering. But there's a big difference, say, between Midlothian, Clackmannanshire and City of Glasgow councils. So, there needs to be some flexibility, I think, within the model, but ultimately it should be a local decision.
Thank you. Graham?
Yeah, agree with that. The legislation is flexible. It gives, it gives transport authorities the power to introduce franchising if they want to, but it's not for everyone. There are different models out there, and we shouldn't be imposing things on local areas.
Okay, thank you. And Paul?
Well, I don't want to mention the dreaded bus service improvement partnership model, but I think it's fair to say that's not been demonstrated as particularly effective. And the key thing is public control. That is the issue. It's not necessarily about public ownership of assets per se, but it's about public control of the system of public transport and accountability. I think it's debasing, frankly, for democratically elected parliamentarians to have to go and beg a bus company to not cut a bus service because the local community rely on it. That's not a democratic situation. And it's actually offensive that that's something that we have to deal with when it's a public service. So I think public control and accountability is the fundamental issue. And there will be many instances where local innovation is really important, and preserving that is really important. We talked about the Straven Climate Bus just earlier, just before we started. And they were nervous about, would we just get kicked out of the way? And when the bus franchising happens, because McGill's will get the contract and we'll be the lot of guys that will be kicked out. We need to make sure it's designed carefully to preserve local examples of innovation, preserve opportunities for community ownership, cooperatives, etc., and allow them to thrive within the wider ecosystem of public control and accountability. But you can't simply have a situation where you have barons ripping out profits from the system and everybody's unhooked to their will. That's not appropriate or desirable.
Okay. Thank you very much. Apologies for asking for questions and then we've run out of time. I'm just going to hand back to Ellie just to wrap things up.
Thank you so much, Shona, and thank you to all of our candidates this evening. I think it is right that we end pretty much on time. We really appreciate you all coming out tonight, and hopefully this has given you some ideas about where to place your vote on the 7th of May. We'd love to recruit you all to the Better Buses for Strathclyde campaign. You should have one of these little leaflets. If you haven't, please grab one on the way out. We're encouraging everybody to write to your candidates, so it won't necessarily be these candidates, it will be the ones in your local area. The website helps you find the people that are standing in your local area, so please take time to do that. And we would love, if you want to stay around for a few minutes, to get photos of people with the placards at the front that we can use in the next 2 weeks during the election campaign. And there are a few T-shirts out on the registration desk. If you're keen to have a T-shirt, you can grab one, or a badge, or a sticker. Thank you so much for coming.
I'm kind of disappointed I didn't ring my bell, but the interjection was too benign.